Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Horror Stories. I know many of you use these episodes to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story 1. Halloween night had always been my favorite ever since I was a kid. There was something magical about it. The decorations, the costumes, the way the world felt just slightly different under the soft glow of porch lights and carved pumpkins. As an adult, I had a new tradition, handing out candy. Seeing the little ones in their outfits threw me straight back into my own childhood, and this Halloween had been no different. I had the house decorated with orange and black lights. A plastic skeleton hung from the front door, and I had carved a particularly grotesque pumpkin that rested on the porch, flickering with the tea candle inside it. It had been a busy night with a constant flow of trick-or-treaters. Pirates, superheroes, witches, and princesses filled the neighborhood. By the time it was 9 p.m., everything was starting to calm down. The kids were heading home and the streets were emptying out. I was about to turn off the porch light and call it a night when someone knocked on the door. Strange, most of the younger kids weren't out at that hour anymore, and the older ones usually rang the doorbell. The knock was soft, almost uncertain, as if whoever was outside wasn't sure they should be there. I picked up the bowl with the remaining candy, thinking it would be one last straggler trying to make the most of things before the night officially ended. When I opened the door, I saw a child on the porch. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, with messy brown hair sticking out from under a black hood. His costume was simple, a plain black cape and a mask that covered his whole face. The mask looked cheap, one of those generic ones you buy at the dollar store, but it had an odd design. A white blank face with hollowed-out eyes and a thin painted-on smile. "Trick or treat," he said, his voice low and muffled by the mask. I smiled and held out the bowl. "You're a little late," I commented, glancing around to see if there were more kids nearby. The street was deserted, no parents waiting on the sidewalk, no groups going up and down the block, just him standing alone on my porch. "Go ahead, take a few," I told him with a gesture. He extended a small gloved hand and grabbed a couple of pieces. I waited for him to say thank you, or maybe run off like the others had, but he stayed there unmoving, staring at me through the mask. Something felt off, though I couldn't say exactly what. Maybe the way he stood so still, fixing his gaze on me, or the fact that I couldn't see his eyes behind the plastic, or maybe the time. He was the last one of the night, and that always carried a faintly unsettling air. "Do you need help getting back home?" I asked, trying to shake off the discomfort. "Are your parents around here?" The boy didn't answer. He stayed like that for a few seconds, and then slowly he turned around and walked down the steps, disappearing into the darkness at the end of the street. I closed the door, shaking my head. He's just shy, I thought. I went back inside, set the bowl down on the table, and turned off the porch light. The house was already quiet, and I was ready to relax. Maybe watch a scary movie before going to bed. I had barely settled onto the couch when there was another knock at the door. Odd. The porch light was off, and it was too late to be getting more kids. Maybe it was a neighbor or someone who had forgotten something. I got up and went to the front door, convinced I would see the same kid as before. But when I opened it, the porch was empty and the street was silent. I stepped out, looked around. Nothing. No kids, no cars, no parents waiting by the curb. Only the wind brushing through the trees and the distant hum of traffic from the main road. I locked the door this time, trying to play down how strange the moment felt. I was about to go back to the couch when I noticed something. The bowl of candy on the table. It was empty. I could have sworn there was still some left when I had set it down, and now there wasn't a single piece. Had I really given out that much? I couldn't quite remember. They knocked again, louder this time. I froze, staring at the door. It was impossible for it to be another trick-or-treater. Not at that hour and with the light off. I moved forward slowly, trying not to make any noise. I pressed my ear against the wood, listening closely. Nothing. No voices, no footsteps, just silence. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest, wondering if I should just ignore it. Then they knocked again. "Hello?" I managed to say, my voice a bit shaky. "Is someone there?" No answer. I stood there for a moment and then finally put my hand on the doorknob. I turned it slowly and opened the door just a crack to peek through. There at the edge of the porch was the boy in the black cape. My stomach tightened. He was standing in exactly the same spot as before. His mask, with those hollow eyes and that thin smile, seemed to glow faintly under the dim light of the street lamp. "Hey, buddy." I forced a smile. "It's late. Do you need help getting home?" He didn't answer. He just watched me through the mask. I couldn't see his eyes or guess what he was thinking or feeling. For a moment, I considered calling the police to make sure he was all right, but something held me back. "Do you want more candy?" I tried to lighten the mood. He didn't react to that either. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if weighing something, and took a step toward me. I stepped back instinctively. "Okay," I said, my voice cracking a little. "I think you should go home now." The boy took another step and then another, slowly approaching the door. I slammed it shut and latched it, my hands shaking. My heart was racing and I didn't really know why. "He's just a kid," I told myself. A weird, quiet kid. But there was something about him, about the way he moved, the way he looked at me, that was wrong. I stayed there for a while, listening, waiting to hear his footsteps moving away. Nothing. Not a creak. Just silence. I glanced out the window and the porch was empty. The boy had vanished. I let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding and tried to shake off that sticky unease. That was when something struck me. The candy bowl I had left on the table was now on the porch, right where the boy had been. Empty just like before. I frowned, trying to understand how it had ended up outside. Had I left the door unlocked? I opened it, grabbed the bowl, and shut it again immediately. Nothing about this made sense. I looked out the front window, scanning the street with my eyes, but the boy had disappeared without a trace. I was about to chalk it up to some elaborate prank when I heard something else. A faint sound, not from the front, but from the back of the house. It was the back door. A minimal creak, barely audible. My stomach twisted. The kid at the front door wasn't the real problem. He had been distracting me. I tiptoed toward the kitchen, every muscle tense. The closer I got, the clearer it became. Someone was fiddling with the back door. I got there just as the doorknob turned slightly. My pulse skyrocketed. I grabbed the first thing I could reach, a heavy candlestick from the counter, and I waited, gripping it tightly. The door opened just a sliver, and I caught a glimpse of the faint outline of a hand gripping the edge. Without thinking, I slammed the door shut with the candlestick, hitting it with a tremendous blow. There was a dull thud and then the sound of hurried footsteps. They hadn't expected that. I ran to the back window and saw two figures bolting full speed into the darkness, one larger and the other about the size of the boy from before. Adrenaline thundered through me. Anger replaced the fear. The kid had distracted me while his accomplices tried to get inside. I secured the back door and rushed through the house, checking every window, making sure everything was locked up tight. I grabbed the phone and called the police. This wasn't a Halloween prank. It was an ambush. The knocking, the boy. It had all been part of a plan to lure me to the front while someone slipped in through the back. When the officers arrived, I told them everything, but by then the figures had vanished. They took my statement and said they would patrol the area, although I knew those people weren't coming back that night. After the police left, I sat in the living room, my head a tangled knot of questions. How long had they been watching the house? And what would have happened if I hadn't noticed the back door in time? I didn't sleep a wink all night. Story 2. It was Halloween of my senior year of high school, and I had almost decided to skip trick-or-treating that night. Most of my friends were over the whole costume thing. They said it was for kids. I wasn't. Halloween had always been my favorite time of year. The costumes, the candy, that whole spooky atmosphere fit me perfectly. My friends thought it was cheesy, but I didn't care. There was something about walking in the dark with pumpkins lighting up porches and the excitement of filling a bag with candy that I just couldn't resist. That year I decided to go as a witch. Nothing original, I know, but it was simple. Besides, I'd found a vintage witch hat at a thrift store, huge and awesome, and I paired it with a black dress and some makeup. Not too over the top, just enough to feel like I was still part of the celebration. I wasn't planning to go door to door for very long, just long enough to get a decent haul. My neighborhood was usually very lively on Halloween. Families out walking, houses decorated with spooky themes, and kids running from door to door with pillowcases stuffed full of candy. My friend Sarah was supposed to come with me, but she backed out at the last minute, saying she had to babysit. I ended up alone, which at first didn't bother me. I'd gone around the neighborhood on my own before, and I figured I could make it quick. With my pillowcase in hand, I headed out, planning to hit a few houses, grab some candy, and get back in time to watch a horror movie. The night went by without any major surprises overall. I walked along the usual streets, recognizing some of the families who went all out with decorations every year. One house had a giant spider that made noise whenever someone walked past. Another had turned its yard into a graveyard with fog machines and creepy music. All pretty standard, nothing out of the ordinary, until I got to a house on the corner of Elm Street. It was an old house, probably from the 1950s or so. I'd been trick-or-treating in the neighborhood for years, but I didn't remember ever stopping at that particular address. It wasn't decorated at all. No pumpkins, no lights, no sign of Halloween. Honestly, it looked like the kind of place where they don't even bother handing out candy. But the porch light was on, and that's usually the universal sign for we have candy. I hesitated for a second, then thought, why not? I walked up the creaking wooden steps and knocked on the door. It took them a minute, but eventually the door opened with a creak and an older woman appeared. She was probably in her late 60s or 70s, wearing a faded floral robe with thin gray hair. She barely said anything. She just nodded slightly when she saw me with my pillowcase. "Trick or treat," I said, smiling. She didn't respond. She simply reached into a bowl by the door and handed me a small wrapped chocolate bar. It looked normal, so I thanked her and turned to leave. That's when I noticed something strange. Inside the wrapper, there was a little folded piece of paper sticking out. At first, I thought it might be some kind of coupon or a Halloween-themed joke. You know, some creative thing people do that night. I put it in my pocket, thinking I'd look at it later when I was sorting through my haul. I didn't pay much attention to it in that moment. I visited a few more houses, but by then the streets were already starting to empty out. Most of the younger kids were heading home, and the decorations in the stillness seemed less festive and more unsettling. After about 30 more minutes, I decided to call it a night. When I got home, I dumped my candy out onto the kitchen table, ready to start snacking. My parents were in the living room watching TV. I could hear the faint sound of a horror movie. I sat down and started sorting the haul, setting aside my favorites. Reese's, Twix, Snickers. Then I remembered the note. I stuck my hand into my pocket and pulled out the folded piece of paper. When I opened it, I thought it would be something silly, like Happy Halloween or a witch joke. But it wasn't. There was nothing funny about it. The note had my name on it. It was handwritten. "I like your costume. I'll see you soon." I just stared at the paper in disbelief. My name. How did that person know my name? And the way it was written. It wasn't playful or light. There was something disturbing about the message. I looked around, half expecting to see someone in the room, but it was just me, sitting in the kitchen with a pile of candy in front of me. My parents were still in the living room, unaware of what I had just found. I tried to brush it off, to convince myself it was a joke from some friend who had slipped the note into my bag. But I remembered that I hadn't been with anyone that night. Sarah had bailed on me, and I had gone out alone to trick or treat. And the house where the note came from. I didn't know the old woman who lived there. How would she know my name? I put the note back in my pocket, trying to shake off the discomfort. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was a coincidence. Still, I couldn't quite get rid of that feeling of unease, like a dark cloud hovering just out of reach. I went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. I couldn't stop thinking about the note, replaying the moment I received it over and over. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that house on Elm Street, the old woman handing me the chocolate bar with that silent, unsettling expression. The next day, I tried to forget about it. Halloween was over, and I figured it was best to move on and not dwell on it. But that afternoon, something happened that made it impossible to ignore. I was in my room doing homework when I heard a soft tapping on my window. At first, I thought I was imagining it. My bedroom is on the second floor, and there's no way to knock on the glass without a ladder or something. But the tapping came again, 3 slow knocks on the window. I stared at the window. The curtains were closed, so I couldn't see outside, but I knew someone was there. The tapping continued, steady and patient, as if whoever it was knew I was inside, knew I could hear it. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I walked toward the window, not wanting to look. Every part of me was screaming not to pull the curtain aside, but I had to know. I had to see who was there. I grabbed the edge of the fabric and yanked it open. Down below in the yard, there was a figure in a dark hoodie. They were standing there looking up at my window. I couldn't see their face, but I knew they were watching me. I stumbled back, my mind racing. I grabbed my phone and called Sarah. "There's someone outside my house," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I don't know who it is, but they're there, watching." Sarah's voice sounded full of concern. "Did you talk to your parents? Seriously?" she asked. "Did you tell your mom and dad?" My parents were still downstairs watching TV. "No, they'll freak out." "Well, maybe they should," she insisted. "This isn't normal." I was about to admit she was right when I heard the knocking again. This time it wasn't coming from my window. It was on the front door. I hung up and rushed downstairs, my heart racing. I looked through the peephole, expecting to see the figure from the yard, but there was no one there. Just the empty porch and the street beyond. I opened the door carefully, searching for any sign of the person I had seen. Nothing. Just as I was about to close it, I noticed something on the porch floor. A single piece of candy wrapped in shiny orange foil. I bent down to pick it up, my hands trembling. Under the candy there was another note. I opened it slowly and my breath caught in my throat as I read the words. "I told you I'd see you soon." My blood ran cold. Whoever it was, they were getting closer. When I finally calmed down a little, I told my parents everything. I described the house where I'd gotten the first note, the figure in the yard, and the last message left at the door. At first they seemed confused, like they thought it was some elaborate Halloween joke. But when they saw the papers, they genuinely freaked out. My dad started pacing around the living room, glancing at the door like he expected someone to knock any second. My mom grabbed the phone and called the police immediately. She spoke in a low but urgent voice, and I could hear her trying to explain the situation. The police arrived shortly after. They took the notes and listened to my story with a seriousness that made everything feel even more real. They searched the yard, looked for signs of someone skulking around, but they didn't find anything. They said they'd patrol the neighborhood for a couple of days, just in case. That didn't make me feel any safer. And what terrified me the most was exactly that not even the police could find anything. Story 3. Halloween, the one night of the year when anything creepy feels normal. I'd never been all that excited about it, probably because I wasn't the type to dress up and go door to door collecting candy. But that year, things were different. My parents had gone out to a fancy Halloween event downtown, and since I was the responsible one, it was my job to take Dylan, my 8-year-old brother, trick-or-treating. He was more than excited, running around the house in his pirate costume and waving a plastic sword like he was ready to conquer the world. I, on the other hand, was not exactly thrilled. At 17, nobody really wants to walk around the neighborhood with a hyperactive kid while everyone else is at parties. But someone had to do it, and since it was only for one night, I told myself I'd survive. After all, Halloween in our neighborhood was a big deal. Almost every house was decorated, and there were kids everywhere, laughing and screaming with that harmless excitement that only Halloween can bring out. Come on, Dylan complained, half his body already out the door. His small hands were gripping his candy bag like it was a treasure chest. All right, hold on, I said, grabbing my jacket, shoving my phone into my pocket, and following him out into the cool October air. The sun was setting, but I knew darkness would fall soon. The kind of darkness that turns regular streets into unsettling shadows and strange silhouettes. We started walking, and Dylan ran straight to the first house, barely getting out a trick-or-treat, before stuffing his bag with even more candy. He was bursting with energy, going from door to door and leaving me halfway down the sidewalk, nodding at parents we passed. It didn't take long for the neighborhood to fill up with kids of all ages. Parents walked behind in groups, chatting while teenagers roamed in packs, some in costume and others just laughing and messing around. Everything seemed normal, until it didn't. It started at one of the houses near the end of our street. We were about halfway through the night, and Dylan was running toward another door when I noticed something, or rather someone, standing by the curb on the other side of the street. I almost missed him because he was so still. He was wearing a mask, but not the fun kind with pumpkins or superheroes or anything kid-friendly. No, it was a smooth white mask, like the kind from old movies, blank, featureless except for 2 small slits where the eyes should be. At first I thought it was just someone trying to scare trick-or-treaters. It made sense, right? Halloween, creepy vibes, somebody in a disturbing mask. Not exactly unusual, but the longer I looked, the more unsettling he seemed. He didn't move. He didn't go house to house like everyone else. He was just there, standing perfectly still. I looked away for a moment, trying to shake the uncomfortable feeling crawling up my spine. When I looked back, the masked man was gone. I scanned the street, expecting to see him farther down the sidewalk, but there was no sign of him. "Come on, next house," Dylan shouted, snapping me out of my trance. We kept going, and I tried to forget about the masked man. It was Halloween, after all. People do weird stuff to scare others. It's part of the fun. The next time I saw him, we were already on another street. Dylan had just rung the doorbell of a house with a giant inflatable spider on the lawn when I glanced toward the end of the block. And there he was, the man with the mask. This time he was at the end of a driveway, half hidden behind a bush. I wasn't imagining it. He was watching us. "Hey Dylan, how about we start heading back, okay?" I suggested, trying to keep my voice calm. I didn't want to scare him. He was too busy comparing candy with some other kids to notice. I, on the other hand, couldn't stop staring. The man didn't move, just stayed there, still as a statue. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through messages to distract myself. But when I looked up again, he was gone. I don't know why, but my stomach tightened into a knot. I hurried Dylan along to the next house, trying to get back into the rhythm of trick-or-treat. But no matter how much I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. We kept moving, and after a while I started to relax. Maybe the guy was just some prankster trying to scare people. I mean, it was Halloween. People are supposed to do weird, creepy things. That's kind of the whole point. However, as we got closer to the edge of the neighborhood, the atmosphere grew more unsettling. The houses there were farther apart, and there were fewer kids around. It was quieter, darker, the kind of place where the shadows stretched longer, and the streetlights flicker a little too much. And then I saw him again. This time he was closer, standing at the edge of a driveway. I stopped in my tracks. "Dylan, stay right next to me, okay?" I said, trying not to let the unease show in my voice. He gave me a why look but didn't argue. "What's wrong?" "Just stay close." We kept walking, but my eyes kept going back to the man. He still didn't move. He was just there, staring at us. We picked up the pace down the street. I wanted to get home, but I didn't want Dylan to be scared. I needed to stay calm. I kept glancing over my shoulder, and every time I did, the man was still there. He wasn't exactly following us, but he wasn't staying in one place either. It's hard to explain. He wasn't chasing us, but he seemed to know exactly where we were going and made sure he never fell too far behind. Eventually, we reached our street, and I felt a wave of relief when I saw our house only a few yards away. I sped up, practically dragging Dylan along with me. I looked back one more time, and he was still there, closer than before. He had crossed the street and was now coming straight toward us. "Run, Dylan," I said. We took off toward the house. The footsteps behind us sped up too, and I knew the man was following us. My heart pounded as I fumbled with the key at the door. Come on," I muttered between my teeth, my fingers trembling. I finally got it open and we both rushed inside. I slammed the door and threw the deadbolt. When I peeked out the window, the man was standing at the end of our driveway, once again perfectly still, staring at the house. I yanked the blinds closed and stepped back, trying to calm the wild thoughts racing through my head. Dylan luckily didn't fully grasp what had just happened. He was too busy sorting his candy, completely oblivious to the figure outside. I stayed near the window for the next hour, peeking through the blinds every few minutes. But eventually, when I looked again, he was gone. I never saw him after that night, but Halloween has never felt the same. Because whoever that man was, he wasn't playing a prank. He was following us. And I can't shake the feeling that someday he'll come back. After that night, I started avoiding Halloween completely. I never told anyone about the masked man, not even my parents. What was I supposed to say? That some random guy with a creepy mask followed us around the neighborhood on Halloween, when almost everyone wears masks and goes house to house. It would sound ridiculous, but it wasn't. I know it wasn't. For weeks after Halloween, I kept catching myself looking out the window at night, scanning the street in case there was any sign of him. He never came back. Life went on, and over time, the memory of that night started to fade. At least for everyone else. Dylan, of course, forgot almost immediately. He was already talking about his costume plan for the next year, completely unaware of how close we might have come to something much worse. I, on the other hand, still think about him. About how he stayed just far enough away that it could seem like he wasn't following us, when he absolutely was. I'll never forget how his blank mask caught just enough light to make me feel hunted. And every now and then, when I'm walking down a quiet street late at night or heading home from a friend's place, I can't help but look over my shoulder, just in case. Because part of me knows that whoever he was and whatever he wanted that night, he's still out there somewhere. Story 4. I was 11 years old the Halloween night it happened, and I remember how excited I was to go trick-or-treating with my best friends, David and Owen. Halloween was our favorite night of the year, not just because of the candy, but because it was one of the few times we were allowed to stay out later than usual. We had the route planned. First, all the top houses that gave out full-size chocolate bars, and then the smaller ones that handed out homemade treats and tiny little bags of candy corn. That year I was dressed as a zombie football player. David was some kind of vampire werewolf hybrid. Don't ask, it was his idea. And Owen was a classic ghost, sheet over his head, 2 cut-out holes for the eyes. We had our pillowcases ready, and by the time we got to the end of our street, they were already half full. Everything was going great, the same fun as always. running up to doors shouting trick or treat, and seeing how much loot we could collect in a single night. In our neighborhood, people really went all out. Fake tombstones on the lawn, spiderwebs, glowing skeletons. It all gave Halloween an exciting vibe, like the whole town was in on the game. At some point, we reached a house on the edge of the block, a little more isolated than the others. The place wasn't particularly creepy, but it had a big oak tree in front, with branches stretching over the yard like bony fingers. They had hung a few cheap decorations, plastic bats on the tree, a pumpkin on the porch, nothing special. On the porch, an old woman was handing out candy. She had a huge bowl of assorted chocolate bars, and of course we got excited. We ran up, yelled the usual trick or treat, and held out our bags. She smiled at us, dropped a generous handful into each one, and waved goodbye. "Thank you, ma'am," David shouted as we headed back to the street. We kept walking, laughing toward the next house without thinking any more about it. It must have been around 9 p.m. when we finally started heading back. Our parents had given us a strict curfew, 9:30 sharp, so we decided to stop going door to door and go back to my house to sort our haul. When we got to my room, we dumped the bags out on the floor, forming a mountain of candy between the three of us. It was already a tradition, sitting in a circle and trading sweets like it was the stock market. David was already digging through his pile, hunting for as many peanut butter cups as he could hoard, and Owen was going for the hard candy. I leaned back, watching them argue over a bag of gummy worms, when something caught my attention. I reached into my bag to grab a handful of chocolate, but what I pulled out wasn't candy. It was weird. Really weird. "What the heck is this?" I muttered, holding what looked like an old tarnished coin. It wasn't one of those fake pirate coins you sometimes get on Halloween. This thing was dirty, heavy, and looked ancient. Owen glanced over. "Who hands out money on Halloween?" "I don't think it's money," I said. It had a symbol engraved on it that I didn't recognize. I set it aside, thinking maybe someone had dropped it in there by accident with the candy, but it didn't stop there. I reached into the bag again, and instead of sweets, I pulled out more strange things. A small lock of hair tied with a red thread, a dried flower, a photograph. The last one made me stop. It was a faded picture of a boy about my age staring straight at the camera. He was standing in front of a house that looked disturbingly familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. "Dude, what kind of candy bag did you get?" David asked, leaning in to see. "I don't know," I answered, feeling uneasiness starting to rise. "This isn't mine. These things weren't in my bag before." Owen looked up from his pile. "Are you sure you didn't grab the wrong bag?" I stared at the collection of strange objects and got goosebumps. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't even recognize the bag itself. It was the same color and size as mine, but the side stitching was a little different. And the fabric felt heavier, rougher. "I think I must have swapped it with someone else's," I said. David, always the logical one, snorted. "Well, check the rest. Maybe there's candy and the rest is just some prank." I turned the bag over, hoping to see chocolate bars, lollipops, anything remotely normal. Instead, more unsettling things spilled out. Old marbles, rusty nails, and a crumpled piece of paper so faded the writing was barely visible. I picked it up and tried to read it, but I could only make out faint strokes, like someone had scribbled it in a hurry and then tried to erase it. "Okay, that's creepy," Owen said, scooting away from the pile. "You got some psycho stash." David was staring at the photo of the boy, serious. "This is really messed up. We should tell someone." I nodded, a knot forming in my stomach, but before I could answer, someone knocked on the front door. The three of us froze. Halloween night, already late. It wasn't exactly the time for casual visits. "Who could that be?" I whispered. "At this hour, nobody comes for candy anymore, right?" "Maybe it's my parents," David suggested. "Maybe they forgot something." But we all knew it didn't add up. His parents had already called to check on us. We weren't expecting anyone. I grabbed a flashlight from my desk and we went slowly down the stairs. I reached the door, took a deep breath, and motioned for them to stay behind me. I turned on the porch light and looked through the peephole. No one there. I opened the door just a crack. The porch was empty, the street silent. I was about to close it when something caught my eye. On the step there was a small cloth bag. My bag. The one I had carried all night. It looked exactly the same as when I'd left the house. My pulse quickened. I stepped out, picked it up, and glanced around. Nothing. Not a soul. Just empty streets and houses still lit with Halloween decorations. I went back inside, locked the door, and showed the bag to the others. "It's yours," Owen said quietly. "How did it get back here?" "I don't know, but look at this." Inside there was a little slip of paper. I opened it slowly, my hand slightly trembling. The note was written in delicate, spidery handwriting. "You took something that wasn't yours." I stared at the message. "What?" David and Owen crowded in to read over my shoulder. "We have to get rid of all of this," David said. "Seriously, this is really bad." I gathered up the pile of strange objects and stuffed them back into the wrong bag. I didn't want any of that in my house. Not the photo, not the hair, not the old coins. Nothing. "We'll leave it at the end of the street," I said. "It's not mine. I don't want anything to do with it." The three of us went out, carrying the bag like it was hazardous material. We left it on the corner, as far from my house as possible, and ran back. We locked ourselves in my room, eating candy nervously and trying to distract ourselves with the video games. But the night felt heavier, darker. The sentence from the note kept echoing in my head like a warning. "You took something that wasn't yours." The next morning I woke up uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had left that note knew exactly what they were doing. I consider myself lucky that nothing worse happened that night. If these stories gave you chills, don't forget to hit like and share the scare with your friends. Which of these terrifying trick-or-treat tales scared you the most? Leave it in the comments and tell me. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next shiver. Stay safe out there, and remember, not every knock at the door is friendly. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.